the subject of Crossrail has come up a great deal. So we're absolutely delighted to have the top man from Crossrail with us. Probably one of those doesn't need any introduction, but I will introduce him just briefly. He's the chairman of the Crossrail project, Terry Morgan. Hi, Terry. Hi. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. You'll need to grab that. Well, okay. As I say, we've heard about mention of it quite a bit. You're about the halfway mark to getting it built, I think, now, aren't you? How's it progressing?
I always start by saying we're on time, and it's been delivered inside the funding envelope made available for the programme. But it's a huge programme. In total, it's £16 billion that is going to be invested on Crossrail. It's, by some order, right now the largest infrastructure project in Europe. So it's going well. When we say we're halfway through, we've done 3/4 of the tunnelling. We're now starting to think very much about moving and mobilising our systems capability to put in place the railway system to support the new programme that we're delivering.
Yes. Just for, again, many people here will probably know most of the outline, but just a very brief, in a paragraph, how you describe what Crossrail is and what you want it to do.
Crossrail is an east-west railway system across the middle of London. It's 120 kilometres long. It starts in the west at a town called Reading, but it has a route that takes you into Heathrow. It stays on the surface until it gets to Paddington. It then goes into a tunnel which is 21 kilometres long. There are twin-bore tunnels, and basically there are 9 stations in the central section that goes from Paddington to Bond Street, to Tottenham Court Road, to Farringdon, to Liverpool Street, Whitechapel, Canary Wharf. So it takes you right across the whole of London. And it probably, if you're familiar with London, it also means that every one of our stations interconnects with either Mike's underground systems as well as National Rail.
And the station fitting out, how's that coming along? Do you work on all the sites, thinking of the central area now, the major interchange stations, do you work on them all at once? How do you prioritise things like that?
You can't. This is a project going to be delivered in 2018. There are some who say that seems a long way away. The truth of the matter is that we've been going for 5 years now, so we have another 4 years to go. We have 45 work sites that are working on Crossrail. So, and the big issue is always around when you're working at that level across the city. And Mike's also doing some other work at Victoria and Bank and Tottenham Court Road, trying to make sure that London doesn't go into gridlock has been something of a big exercise in itself. I should hasten to add, Nick, that one of the things that, if you're not familiar with Crossrail and you're familiar with the underground, this is much bigger. The tube is typically on the underground 4 metres. Crossrail is 7 metres. Typically on a metro system train, the trains will be 6 to 7 cars. This will have a capacity for 12 cars. So the platform lengths at these stations will be 250 metres long. So it's big.
Yes, I can agree with that. I went down and saw Canary Wharf in the early stages. The station seemed to stretch absolutely for miles and miles. It was incredible.
Well, if you take the main building in the wharf and you pick it up, you put it on its side, that's the size of the station.
Incredible. Right, okay, let's talk about the rolling stock now. The procurement process for that. £1 billion that I believe you have to spend. Political implications as well. Just talk us through that.
Well, there were other people who were worried about political implications. I have to say, as chairman of Crossrail and the Crossrail team, we wanted value for money. And we had 3 bidders. We had a Spanish bidder, we had a Japanese bidder, and we had a French-Canadian stroke UK manufacturer. And there was, in UK terms, a lot of media attention around where this train should be built. We're buying Bombardier, which is actually common with the Underground's recent procurement, so there's some consistency in that regard, but I have to say at the end of the day, Bombardier offered best value for money.
What were you looking for? But what does this sort of train need? How does it differ, for example, than a new underground train for Mike's network?
Well, I'd like to think it's almost the other way around, Nick. Mike's new trains, I suspect, will be another step beyond the trains that we're building. Our trains are a step beyond the trains that Mike is currently putting into service. So our trains are lighter. Again, unusually for London, they will be all air conditioned. And in terms of speed between stations, it has the ability to accelerate at a much higher rate.
Right, okay, we hear all about the project and massive that it is. What is the idea? What are the benefits supposed to be for this?
Well, I'm going to repeat Mike's story, but in a slightly different way. In the next decade, London is due to grow by another 1 million people. Crossrail will enable an extra 1.5 million people to travel into London in less than 45 minutes. So that's seen as an important statement. Crossrail will add 10% more capacity to public transport in London, but it is only east-west, and I'm in no doubt at all, as soon as that service is in play, the pressure will be on what are we going to do about north-south. So in London terms, big debate around how do we follow that with a Crossrail 2 programme. And why does London think it can do it? Well, you've only got to look at the regeneration story. It's absolutely massive in London. Over 50% of the planning applications for development in London cite Crossrail as one of their primary reasons for actually wanting to develop sites for houses, retail, and office accommodation. So it does, as it's always done, railway systems bring regeneration with it.
And extraction from other services, though, you presumably a lot of trains into Paddington and places like that won't be carrying the same number of passengers. Is this part of the calculation, or do you just sort of devote yourself to what you're trying to do?
The answer to the latter is yes, but secondly, I have to tell you by 2018, the pressure, I suspect on Crossrail, some people will change their mode of transport. Some of it will reflect the fact that London has grown as a city, and I suspect the plan right now is that whilst people talk about Paddington, the real regeneration, the real growth will be to the east of London, that will build on things like the Olympic site and further east. So I suspect in terms of regeneration, that's going to be the real centre of attention for London.
Now, what about the integration? We know we can imagine in our minds, if we can't see it clearly anyway, the integration with the underground lines, national rail, other transport infrastructure. How does it work? The basic principle is you're at the bottom all the time, aren't you? But you're underneath everybody else. No. Can't be anywhere else, can you?
We're not actually. You said I heard comments about the Northern Line. At Tottenham Court Road, we actually went over Tottenham Court Road. Our tunnel boring machines are 140 metres long. They're 1,000 tonnes each, and we went within half a metre of the London with half a metre of the Northern Line. We didn't stop the service. Late at night, when it was quiet, you could probably hear it. But it's a sign of the technology, and the fact of the matter is that whilst the tube systems are important that we avoid, but there's also a lot of other utilities and other buildings, some very deep buildings in terms of more recent structures. But again, by the very nature of tunnelling, you will get a degree of ground movement. So things like St Paul's Cathedral, you suddenly learn, has no foundations. And so the whole question about sustaining the integrity of these very old buildings is one of the challenges that we've had to face.
And a lot of archaeological discoveries, as we've heard in the last couple of days.
It's one of those things that there are so many different things you can talk about. In terms of archaeology, we found a pit with almost 30 bodies in there from the Black Plague. The bodies themselves have been reasonably well preserved, so we were able to take DNA off the bones and establish exactly what the source of the plague was. There are still remnants of it today around the world. But it's just one of those fascinating things. Might sound slightly ghoulish to talk about skeletons, but we have found hundreds.
Do these sort of, I mean, archaeology is perhaps a small thing, but things hold you up. Remnants of bombing from the Second World War, there are all sorts of tricky things that you face that you couldn't have predicted, but you're still confident about your opening date.
Where we are today, we are very confident that we're going to deliver on time. And I think as Mike said, we're in a world where railway investment is at its highest. It requires a huge amount of political support. My experience of politicians, you let them down, they'll find something else to do. And so I think it's really important we carry on with that success story about investment in such an important infrastructure and that we deliver it on time.
Right, okay, now you've mentioned Crossrail 2. I've seen a map. I don't really believe this map. Fantastic. If it happens, when it happens, I'm sure you would say. But what about integrating that, and what about HS2 as well?
Yeah. Ever since Crossrail as a project existed, there was always a prescribed route called Crossrail 2, and so we've been protecting that route from planning for some considerable time. However, the detail now is changing that route. For me, Crossrail 2 it's just a question of when, not if. There will need to be more capacity of the sort that a Crossrail will bring to the system, a new railway. As regards HS2, this is a north-south route, national route that's high speed, that takes you up to Birmingham, Manchester. We have a big depot just west of Paddington, called Old Oak Common, and that's where HS2 will actually enter into London, into that London boundary, and we have provided for a route that will enable High Speed 2 to go through that. It will have to stop actually at Old Oak Common and transfer a proportion of the passengers to Crossrail in order to do an east-west route. So there's a fair amount of integration work in the future. However, right now, when people talk to me about that, we've created a provision to do so, but we're very firmly set on getting the project done by 2018.
And other provisions, I'm thinking mischievously of City Airport. You dive right under it, don't you? But there is no station?
No, well, there's a station at Custom House. And I have to admit, there are some areas that are not as finessed as it ought to be. And I can well imagine over the next 4 or 5 years, there will be a lot of discussion around how to improve access to City Airport from Crossrail. It is possible to do that. It's just a question of funding.
Right. As you look at the project, what's the proudest thing for you of doing this job?
I'll answer 2 things.
You can, as many as you like.
Oh, I've got lots, but I'll give you a few of them. I am really proud of being able to sit in front of you and say it's on time, on cost. That's so important. I personally am very proud of the fact that when we placed our contracts for this program, we put a stipulation in that our contractors would have to have an apprentice for every £3 million worth of contract value, or that they employed somebody who was unemployed. We set ourselves a target 4 years ago of having 400 apprentices. We've just revised that target to just short of 500. It's also true to say that on the program, there are now over 500 people who were unemployed, and we built a training centre down in East London, and we take people who are unemployed through pre-employment training. They meet the contractors, and I have to say it's a joy to watch people suddenly have some meaning in their life. And that's, for me personally, a really strong sense of achievement that's beyond just delivering the railway. It's really important to think about legacy. I am very proud of also that, in spite of this being a European conference, 95p in the pound is spent in the UK economy. That, for me, is all about trying to create a capability in the UK that enables it to compete with those who are here today from other parts of Europe. I don't hide my sort of pride in terms of saying we want to compete with you.
Indeed. Terry Morgan, thank you very much indeed. Will you thank him? Thank you so much. So if you could